couple last minute changes to not really changes. These are things that I think have largely been set in stone for a while now. But couple of public changes to Overwatch League rosters as we're going into season 3. First and foremost, the Atlanta Reign have added Kodak and Fire to the roster as supports, puts the roster as 12 as Sephi promised on our episode with him earlier this offseason. And it's perfectly balanced. Each position has a backup. 3
as all things should.
Yeah, it's right there. Kodak, of course, started off last season with the Atlanta Reign before leaving the team to play on Atlanta Academy instead. So let's talk about Kodak first. Joe, I want to ask you about this a little bit. I feel like you're more of the NA contenders watcher guy.
I feel like I can speak on Kodak.
Yeah,
I don't think
so
he's super unknown.
The big idea is that on the Atlanta Reign last year, if I'm understanding this correctly, on Atlanta Reign last year, he was just kind of warming up the bench. Dogman was largely taking most of the play time, and not taking, but earning, whatever you want to say. He was playing the most out of it, and Kodak came to a mutual decision with the Atlanta Reign to go play for Atlanta Academy. He stayed with the Atlanta Reign team throughout his stint with the Academy. I think that's one of the big thing. Brad came out and said, like, hey, he's still very much part of the team. We just want him to get more play time. We want him to continue to grow as a player, to play at the Overwatch League level, and warming the bench probably isn't a winning situation for either us or Kodak.
Yep.
So, what do you think, based on, I think, his experience in contenders and just overall? Is this someone who's coming back and is going to make an impact on the Atlanta roster this year, or is this, I think, something maybe is he just going to come back and ride the bench again?
I think for most deep rosters, I think with teams that actually do have a bench, there is going to be lull periods for even just starters. If hero pools are going to be as drastic as some people claim they should be, there's a good chance that having your second string flex support, your second string main tank, whatever it might be, they're going to get ahead of the game in terms of practice, which should net them starting positions in almost a rotational way, right? If things don't turn out to be as drastic as what people say they should be within regards to hero pools, there's a good chance that Kodak still sees a bit of bench time. But there again, we can't sleep on the fact that travel is quite stressful. Travel's hard to do. It's not, we're not built to be on the move that often, and people are going to suffer because of it, in terms of their play, in terms of the level that they can bring. So if you have somebody that's fresh, somebody that is, sharing scrim time as much as, you can allot them, they should move up. I think this is the season to build out your roster. I think it's good in general. It's a good safety measure to kind of keep your team able to fill positions. We saw teams even last year, main tanks having to go back to Korea for XYZ reason, DPS, weren't able to play because of the stress of, stage time, and had to leave. And the teams didn't have, replacements. Now that is kind of a guarantee almost that that's going to happen, and having a substitute and incorporating them and building a system to actually incorporate them, which it sounds like what is exactly what Atlanta has done. Sephi's words. I think this is good overall. I think teams that have built out their rosters will probably do well. I tried to incorporate that in my power rankings, and I think Kodak is definitely good enough to play. But it's how they incorporate him. It's same goes with Fire, and obviously that's kind of the logical next step. Fire's very, very talented. And so is Kodak. So I think this is the season to have a bench player, to have a system in place to actually incorporate them in either now or in the future. And they should see results based on that. They should see positive increases.
Fair. Yiska, what do you think? I mean, is this... I tend to feel like there's the reactions to this are kind of polarized in the sense that either like, great, we have depth here, Dogman and Masa are still going to just, be the go-to starting, supports for the raid. But I also have other people saying that these are both really good supports, and on certain heroes, especially like, I don't know how Dogman's Moira is. Right? I don't like.
Actually, pretty good.
It is good. Yeah. Great. Yeah, I have no idea. I haven't watched probably a lot of it.
Maybe his best hero, which is always funny. Like whenever Dogman says he hates something, he's probably very good at it. It's like just like the formula that has been popping up with him. It's kind of weird how like usually it's the other way around. Like when I teach a child and they're like, I hate division. It's like, yeah, because you're not good at it. But for him, it seems to be the other way around.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is that? I mean, is he good enough on Moira, Zen, and Ana? Or do you think it's more of a map pick, or do you think it's just simply backup and who's feeling better on that day or planned rest?
I think teams would be well advised to sort of specialize part of their players. Also, there's like when Zephy was here, he was talking about a lot about like team chemistry and like having players in whatever. I feel like the prohibitive part, and that sort of seeped through last season, that Dako and Kodak couldn't coexist, and I'm not necessarily sure that was actually on Kodak. And again, this is not me leaking any new juice. That's just like repeating what happened. I can already see the Reddit clip of this. I'm not leaking anything. That's just like my recollection of how this was how this was presented. And I think we could be seeing like a specialization maybe of Kodak in that regard. Sure. I also think he wasn't much worse than Dogman when he was actually playing. So it's okay. If you look at the Atlanta roster, I think a lot of people would say that flex support is probably their starting flex support would probably be considered one of the first roles to be upgraded by a better or someone else. I think that's the general. That's the temperature I get from the community. I think that might be true, but it's also a thing of availability. And honestly, there aren't that many flex supports outside of Overwatch League that deserve it more than, or would be better than Kodak. And by the way, this also extends to Crimzo. So I think this is a fine pickup, knowing that like just how he works in that environment. I think you're also well advised to have people with like a certain attitude towards their profession, to have them in the team, especially when travel starts, when volatility starts. So like all I've heard of Kodak in terms of like personal relationship is strictly positive. Yep. So I don't mind that pickup at all.
Yeah. Do you think a 12-person roster is more important and impactful now that we're in hero pools? Do you think that'll...
I think it, and I said this going into the preseason, I was skeptical when everybody was saying it's not feasible, right? It's not financially sustainable to be able to have this kind of roster, and I totally agree with that. But I think it's primarily based on the efficiency. Do you have a strong coaching staff that has a structure in mind to incorporate these players? If so, then yes. If you can afford it, great. If you have the budget for it, go for it. as long as that coaching and that structure is in place, I think it's very efficient to be able to do this. And if you have the right players, if you have the right eyes on those players and they meet those metrics, then great, bring them in. But if you are not, and you don't have your coaching staff doesn't feel comfortable trying to integrate all these players into a practice system, then don't. It's probably not worth it, because you're going to get people like they did in season 1, unhappy with where they're at and kind of just stuck in a contract. Like, I don't want to be here. I'm getting paid great, but I don't, we're not even being used. That doesn't feel good. And I think that's what people like Taimu, people like Flower, a lot of the older kind of the old guard almost have gone back to contenders to at least get some play time, to keep their wheels moving and to keep their stock at least at an average in the public's eye. And we know that actually affects what teams and the decisions that they make. So I think that's overall a net positive. But to go back to the question, I think it comes back to, does it make sense for your team? I don't think it's just a broad sweeping answer. I do think this season in general, you need depth, but to go all the way to 12, I think that varies.
I think what is interesting though is, for instance, London across the preseason has been scrimming A and B team. Sure. So teams would literally like book scrims against London B or against London A. And those also, from what I understand, are quite different in quality. So it's interesting to see that this soul type of thing is happening again, but even to a further extent where it's like, and there's still substitutions between the squads happening and whatnot. It's like not that set in stone, but it's a interesting dynamic, and we will have to see how this turns out, because like the hard division. I will also say, I think a lot of teams will start solidifying their roster. I think, for instance, for ATL, that's probably the case.
Sure.
Where they pretty much know their starters. And
of course. I think most teams probably have their starting rosters, but it's a marathon. It's not a race. Sure. And as long as, like I said, as long as the coaching staff has systems put in place to incorporate these bench players into the team, so you're not just like plugging in a new player that just has been grinding Sombra or been grinding Baptiste, that might be good on paper, but in practice, that's a brand new player to add to the system. But what I will say is it's very interesting to me that it's always been Korean teams that try this and find at least some success with it. We've seen it with London, Seoul. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but when you go to other esports like StarCraft, like League of Legends, that's a very normal thing.
Yes,
you have like a B team that is your dedicated practice partner. It's like, hey, it's almost like an underclassman. There's just like, hey, I need you to go do this for me. I need you to play this against me in this way, in this specific time, so that I can get better. And by that, you kind of build social stock and you climb up the ladder that way. But
I'll even tell you, I think a player like Zephyr would be highly sought after in like, let's say he was as good in scrims
as people say.
As people say in like StarCraft. Like that would be a baller practice partner, whatever, if he doesn't bring it on stage. But if you can have like your top players practice against a guy like that, that would be quite attractive to a lot of organizations back in the day. So I think that like in Brood War, there are legends about like some scrim gods that could never like bring it on the big stage, and that ultimately were like premier practice partners for the actual like bourgeois and stuff. So I think it is an interesting part. Like we also see this like when we talked about Atlanta Academy with Zephy, and we talked about Sugar Free, where it's like, like he straight up says like, I'm not bringing him because I expect, like, I want to keep him warm so he can in 4 years play for me in the Overwatch League. It's like, I want to have him here because he's nuts and he helps my main team and the other players on his team in contenders grow. Yeah. Right. So that aspect certainly is part of it.
it opens up a whole broad question about how you can value contenders teams, and we kind of were talking about that pre-show, but I think there are like non-monetary values that are very valuable to teams that do have contenders teams that can get players earlier, can use it for scouting, but could also use it for genuine practice, like actual good practice partners that wouldn't be able to play in the Overwatch League anyways, right? Obviously, Sugar Free in 4 years' time might be a completely different person, but right now he's a great player and is going to challenge my main team much in the same way that an Overwatch League team would challenge them.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of bypass these rules almost in practice, and I think that's valuable.